everyone, and welcome back to season 3 of Commerce Meets Law, a podcast where we talk about various commercial topics and how they interact with the legal profession. Today's episode features Justin Brandt-Sarif, currently an investment structuring lawyer at Pantheon after completing his training contract at Mayer Brown last year, followed by a stint as part of the regulatory team at Goldman Sachs. In this episode, we firstly discuss Justin's life growing up in the US and why he decided to move to the UK, where his interest in law first came from, and his journey to getting a training contract, why he decided to leave Mayer Brown post-qualification, whether he felt any apprehension about leaving Goldman Sachs after such a short period, and his reasoning behind that, and finally, his current role at Pantheon and where he wishes to take his legal career in the next few years. I loved Justin's honesty and realistic perspective on his entire journey to date. I think that, as I've mentioned before in this podcast, there's a lot of discussions about the route to getting a training contract and really not much about what happens after that. And I think that Justin's story and his journey so far really shows that there are actually a lot of options for you post-qualification, and you can really take the time to think about all of those. So I think this episode is a really brilliant way of showing you that there are those options out there for you should you choose to consider it. Just a quick request before we get into the conversation. I'd really appreciate if you'd kindly give the podcast a follow and a rating on Spotify or an Apple Podcast, wherever you listen to these episodes, as it really helps us reach more listeners. Without further ado, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you right at the end. Hi, Justin. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Really excited to chat to you all about your journey so far. But before we start, we always have an icebreaker on the podcast, which is, in your opinion, what is your superpower?
Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me. My superpower, the one that I will not be using today on this podcast, is that I can, if somebody asks me a question I don't like, I can answer them with something so long-winded that they have no recall of what the question was, but they think, they're like, oh yeah, that's great. And then if they actually listen to the response in their head, they're like, we haven't gotten anywhere with that. So no, I will stick to the real one, which is make people generally feel very at ease. I'm very good at building relationships with people like stupidly quickly. It's not a superpower that I think is very intentional. I don't typically use it for evil. I'll say that. I typically just try to, I just like meeting new people, and generally that serves me very well.
Yeah, and I can imagine that it's probably useful with law and sort of your work as well. Do you find that that's like developed more as you've been in the workplace, or do you think that like it's always just been there and it's just expanded?
I think it's kind of just been there and probably expanded,
Mm,
but in reality, I think it's just sort of become, I think, more consciously noticed. So like,
right.
I never thought of it as sort of being a skill in any way.
Yeah.
I was acquaintances with everyone, right? Like I never had any enemies, and I think I got to a certain point and realized I only have like 5 really close friends, but that was like more than enough for me. And I had a very sort of close-knit, tight circle of people that I was with on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But then I also realized like I was on good terms with everyone.
I think people can probably hear it from
Yes,
from the
they can,
accent.
I'm sure. I'm
So can you
sure.
tell us a little bit about life growing up in the US and when you decided to make the move across the Atlantic?
If I have to think about sort of like growing up in the United States, I think the quintessential like experience that is growing up in the US, and I think this differs by where it is that you grew up in the United States. I am originally from Los Angeles, California, and sort of like slowly made my way east. Graduated from high school in 2012 and then moved to DC for undergrad. And then when I was done with my undergraduate degree in 2016, I moved to New York to work in finance for 2 years. And then only then did I got engaged to my now wife, and I moved to London. She's British.
Nice.
And the progression was very organic. But I do think growing up in the US, versus in the UK is a very intense experience. In some sense, a lot of people look at the United States, especially sort of the academic experience, as very open and very flexible and very lax, right? You can, major in whatever you want, or minor in this, or do this other thing, or have a general field of study. But then if you actually look at the earlier, portions of your education and your upbringing, it's actually extremely regimented and it's very intensely scheduled. I was in school from like 7:30 in the morning until 5:30 in the evening, and then we had our extracurriculars
Oh,
afterward.
wow.
I think the European mindset to childhood and maybe like early teens is actually a little bit more like you really should like live your life and enjoy a little bit more of your time. I think we're moving maybe a bit more now, and I'm sort of seeing it because I have nieces that are, right around secondary school age, and they are starting to get a bit more intensely scheduled. But my overall experience, maybe this is just the Californian, is we actually did try to find
Yeah.
as much time as humanly possible to like chill a little bit and
Yeah.
really just sort of enjoy the sun, enjoy sort of like that aspect of it as well. I mean, I really enjoy living in the UK, and I have a lot of American friends who live here. Partially because I think expats kind of like find each other, but a lot of us have actually said like we have no real intention on moving back to the United States at the moment. There's definitely a vibe of, I think there's a bit more respect for annual leave. There's literally more annual leave, and I think the balance on family life versus work life in the UK is
Mhm.
a bit more leaning toward the balance aspect. And I think in the US, like they really see it very differently. It's not a good thing or a bad thing, but I do think if you have intentions and sort of having a family, but also trying to balance, especially a career in law. I ultimately chose to move to London because I married a Brit and I wasn't really intending on moving to the UK until I met her. And she was in medical school at the time and wasn't looking to relocate or retrain or,
Right.
do any of that. So I was looking to go to law school from where I was at the time. I was at Bloomberg and sort of in their financial analytics division. And when we had met and things were really working out, she had basically said, like, have you ever thought about maybe going to law school in the UK? Um, I then looked at the price tag of a Juris Doctor and of the GDL at the time. And needless to say, the GDL was significantly more logistically, I would say preferable. I think is the best move that I ever could have made.
So interesting. Like, firstly, to the point you mentioned about the education system, because I think that I don't know if it's the American high school dramas that we watch here, or just like the general perception of all people seem to do in school is just like wear really nice clothes because most of these schools don't seem to have uniform, and then all
Right.
they're talking about is with like the guys and their sports and the girls and the makeup, and that's very much like a stereotype of what that looks
Yeah.
like, and
Yeah.
I think like you said, there's a lot more regiment to it, and I think also because in the UK you start choosing so quickly of like
Yeah.
from GCSEs, you're kind of like narrowing it down and then narrowing it down, and then at university you're just doing one subject as opposed to a bit more choice in that sense in the
Yeah.
US. I think there is that perception, but like you said, we don't have like my school day was from 8 to 3, so yeah, those extracurriculars, I think, depending on the kind of schools you go to, is very much a choice, an option, a
Hmm.
financial decision, depending on your parents,
Yeah. Yeah.
responsibilities at home, all that sort of stuff. I guess with law school, what made you want to switch from finance to law? I know you mentioned the UK reason was
Yeah.
obviously because of your partner, but why law school?
When I was in high school, I was a debater. I was a legislative debater.
Yeah.
And when you're in the US, like you can do trial law. Trial law is something that you can just get into from law school.
Oh,
When you would join sort of a big firm like Mayer Brown, or as the US refers to them as like big law,
yeah.
if you were to join a litigation team, you would be advocating at trial. Like that is not the job for a barrister. That is an attorney. Like attorneys are this one-stop shop title of
Yeah.
we represent our clients, and if that's in the courtroom, that's in the courtroom.
Yeah. Your Harvey Specter
Yeah,
impression.
basically, Harvey, I think, is far more on the corporate side. But yeah, like he does go
Yeah.
to trial, and when he chooses to litigate, I'm sure he's great at it. But yeah,
Without reading anything, like reading a brief
exactly.
for 2 seconds.
No, I mean he's never read anything. He just sort of takes it in stride in his head. He had the whole case
Yeah.
before. He's just gonna show up.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be a trial lawyer, and when I was a debater in high school, I had actually I'd been a swimmer, and I really loved swimming, but I got into a bit of an injury when I was 16, and I wasn't able to go in the pool. And so I got really into debating, and I sort of dedicated all of my time and focus to it because I was on crutches for like months. I got very into it. I went to conferences and I started, getting debating awards. And eventually I, became the captain of the debate team and loved it and thought, I want this to be my job. Like, I want this to be my career. And obviously, right, debating and legislative debating is like basically the work of like a handful of people in the capital, right? Like, but I thought to myself, okay, like what do they do? Well, they make law, right? That is what they do. They ultimately legislate and they push their side, but their whole time that they're pushing their side, all they're doing is making a case, right? That case just happens to be for their bill or for their piece of legislation as to why they want it to pass or whatever. And so from my perspective, I came at it from, okay, like how do I get paid to make cases? Okay, I got to be a lawyer. And I mean, I made the transition from finance to law, not because I didn't like finance. I only went into finance to save up some money to go to law school. I knew my strengths, which were oral advocacy and writing. I loved to write. And in the U.S., like you have undergrad, and I studied political science and applied ethical philosophy, but where you are in undergrad, there's something called pre-tracks, right? So there's pre-med, right? But pre-med is actually like classes. You need to take organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry and physics and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
There's nothing mandatory to get into law school, but they advise you on what to do to prepare yourself for the reading load and the writing load that comes along with a Juris Doctor. And so I focused really hard on specific writing courses and the philosophy of law as a class as an undergrad, right? I couldn't take law school classes, but I could take the philosophy of law. Ultimately, I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer for a long time. Finance was a very temporary path, but while I was in finance, it gave me enough knowledge of the financial world that, like that aspect of law was something that I could pursue.
Similar to the US, like there's no prerequisite in order to study law at university. You could
Right.
basically have done any combination of subjects, and
Right.
some they may have
There is
preferences
A-level
of
law,
like
right?
yeah, you could do so. Like for
Yeah.
example, I didn't do A-level law, but there were lots of people on my course who did do A-level law, and that helps you to an extent with like first year perhaps, but then
Right.
obviously you go more in depth at university
Yeah.
and that sort of thing. And then if you could do a route where like you did, someone else could do like a non-law degree and then do the GDL. So there's lots of different pathways from that kind of point of like moving to the UK to law school to then Mayor Brown and the training contract. There was quite a long journey there. Could you talk to us a bit about when your sort of application cycle started and how you eventually got that successful TC offer with Mayor Brown? What was that journey like?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very long journey. I arrived not really understanding the solicitor barrister route, but basically I arrived, and the only law firms that I knew were American firms. Like in my last year
Yeah.
of undergrad, sort of prepping for law school, thinking, where do I want to work? Where do I want to like see myself? Being in DC, there's a very heavy like political scene and heavy regulatory law. Mayor Brown has a big regulatory practice, as does Covington and Burling, where Eric Holder, the former Attorney General, ended up going. Jones Day has good presence, right? There's like lots of, big firms have like massive Washington, D.C. presence. And so I just started applying, and not successfully, mind you. I was rejected everywhere that I applied. I had no idea what these VAC scheme applications needed. Like, I didn't know what they wanted from me. I wouldn't even say that my first cycle was a cycle. I applied to like 3 firms. I got an outright rejection, one video interview, and then another outright rejection. And I was like, that's 3. I can't count this as anything. Then the next year I was sort of doing the actual law conversion. I went to loads of open days, and I just sort of wanted to see what kind of firm was for me. And I ended up getting 3 VAC scheme offers that year, to 3 major US law firms. I ended up getting a single training contract offer out of those 3. Getting the training contract offer off of the VAC scheme was like the biggest feeling of accomplishment imaginable. I found the adjustment to UK academia, and in particular to the GDL, extremely difficult. The United States education system, in particular politics or the liberal arts, is very flowery. It's very fluffy. On the GDL, they wanted what I couldn't give them. I didn't understand that they wanted cite the point, cite the law, cite the case, move on. The training contract offer that I got required a commendation on the GDL, and I didn't get it. And I lost my training contract offer.
Right.
And that was devastating. Like, I was just like, how could I let this happen?
Yeah.
Where did I go wrong? And it was tough. Like, the first day was tough. And I was like, okay, regroup. Yeah. What do we do now? Okay, the answer is you paralegal for a year, right? Are you still determined to be a lawyer? Yes. Yeah. How do we get there? A training contract. You've done this once, and you happened to get like one of the few firms in the whole city that doesn't require a pass at first sitting. Okay, so why don't you just ask better questions going into your next cycle? Talk to the HR teams. What do you require? And they were like, we just require a pass. And I was like, oh, well, I actually have that. So I went at it again, but I also looked for firms that I perceived as actually nicer, like, places. Like, the really elite US firms are intense, right? Like, where you do get those jobs, you make certain sacrifices, but at the same time, you get insanely interesting work. You're talking about cases that make their way into the Telegraph, into the Guardian. You see business transactions that make their way into the FT, right? Like, you're working on really interesting things, really complex international matters. I applied to like other US firms that in my mind had as much by way of, name cash, but that really wanted to focus on like smaller trainee intake sizes that could train us really well. But at the same time, I read everywhere and I talked to people through LinkedIn. I wanted a training program that was quite formalized. I kind of wanted like a week of induction at the beginning of my seat to understand, okay, this is what I'm looking at. These are like the big jargony terms. What do they mean? How to find this out? What would you recommend? Because you can do your library induction. They can tell you, go to Practical Law, go to LexisNexis. But actually, not a lot of that is going to help you in like a really commercial seat versus in a litigation seat. Practical Law is going to help you far more on an advisory front where there's a super technical point, but you want a high level overview. Okay, I want to get acquainted with this idea and then move forward from there. Mayer Brown really fit the bill. I got a straight training contract offer from them because I was working full time, so I couldn't do the VAC scheme. And I got the training contract offer, and the next week I actually got it on the phone on a Friday, and that Wednesday I came back. And where I was paralegaling at the time was like, yeah, you guys, like, we're gonna do a lockdown training run just Wednesday to Friday, and like we'll see you guys on Monday. Lockdown hit, the city froze, training contracts like started drying up. I signed the paper as quickly as I possibly could, and then we went into lockdown, and I actually did the LPC entirely in lockdown. I think the whole journey to getting to Mayer Brown was really tumultuous. And I realized in hindsight that the whole pathway, the legal pathway, tests you in a lot of ways. Do you really want it? Yes. If you do, you can get it, right? Like, yes, you are competing against a lot of people. And I remember going into interviews thinking, oh, like, I'm not getting this. And I remember my wife has now said, she's like, why not? Somebody has to. I was like,
that's a good way to look at it.
I was like, wow, I never really thought of it that way. She's like, If there are 15 trainees at Mayer Brown, that means that there are 15 trainees at Mayer Brown. Why can you not be one of those 15?
Yeah.
Whenever, anyone asks, I get LinkedIn messages actually quite frequently that sort of ask like, hey, like, what would you advise? Actually, I wouldn't even say LinkedIn anymore. I get them more on Reddit than I get it on anything.
Oh,
Yeah, on like the UK law like
right. Yeah,
group.
yeah,
If I ever like leave a comment or something, I get a lot of
yeah.
DMs from people that have seen my comment once and been like, that sounded useful. Like,
Yeah.
but honestly, there's no recipe. Obviously, ChatGPT is helping now, right? In ways that it was not helping when I was doing it. It
Yeah.
didn't exist when I was doing applications.
Yeah.
But if you can get an answer, and ChatGPT is not a bad thing at all, but it should be the starting point. You can read that, but then put your voice, inspire your voice, breathe it back into that paragraph. Because how you would write something is not how somebody else would write it. And I can tell you now, the number of people that are going to leave that chat GPT response and put it on, like in the little, box on these applications, they're going to sound so vanilla compared to the personality and the experience that comes along with like, okay, ChatGPT gave me this, but like, how would I phrase that? How would I change it? How would I tweak it? Finally getting to Mayer Brown and getting my training contract and qualifying was like 6 years in the making. But like, you get there in the end and it doesn't matter how, you just do. Like, somebody has to get it. You just have to have faith in yourself. I was married to a woman who's way smarter than me and actually did have faith. And she was like, just keep going, like keep doing it. And it works.
You made the right move by moving over. It was worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. No question about that.
Yeah. On that last point about ChatGPT, I mean, we've had a couple of people from graduate school, like within law firms as well, and that's the one thing they say. We can tell as well that it's ChatGPT, and that's not because that one's not got any spelling errors or anything, but it's just the way it's been written. So I think, like you say, it's great for a start, and it's there for a reason, but that's all it should be, rather than your end result. I think that there are a lot of people in that position of like they may have got the training contract, and for whatever reason, at the end that can be revoked, and that's really, really tough. But also it gives you a chance to, like you mentioned, like think about, well, is this the place I want to be? Do I look elsewhere? And if this really is where I want to be, can I then try and apply again? And it's not the end of the road, and I think that's hard to see when you're in that position, but it's much better looking at it in hindsight.
When they revoked my training contract, my family was actually in London from the US at the time.
Oh, God.
And I was really gutted. I remember we were sitting down in I think in Carnaby actually. I think we were there for dinner, going to a show. And I was like, how am I going to enjoy this show? Like, they just revoked my TC. My wife, Michelle, was with me and she just said, you don't want to be at a firm like that. That's a preview of coming attractions, dude. There are lots of firms that you're going to have super competitive edge, and you will come out and everyone is going to be impressed with your credentials. But if anyone is saying like, oh, like you didn't hit the mark on that test, we're not interested in reinforcing our contract, we're pulling this. Okay, they don't want to be with you, you don't want to be with them.
Yeah.
Right, like the value system is a value system. So if somebody is just not, they're saying no, right, we're not keeping our, we're not keeping this in place, let it go, because you will find, and I did find, a firm that was a better fit for me.
Absolutely. And can I just say, Michelle sounds like the cheerleader that you need by your side. Like she's given all the right advice at the right time.
Just to put it in perspective, she was in medical school when we met, was a medic practicing.
Yeah.
And left the NHS to do the law conversion, and she is starting her training contract next month.
Oh my God. I mean, as if one of them wasn't hard enough. She's just done both.
Yeah. I'm incredibly lucky to have her in my life. She is like unrealistically intelligent. Like it's insanity as to, what she has pushed and persevered through, because she's done the SQE route and done all of that. And we have a 4-year-old. She's done all of that with a child.
You mentioned earlier that you knew what you wanted with Mayer Brown, and you liked the fact that they had like a formal process and that sort of thing with the training contract. I guess in that same sense, did you know at the end of the training contract that you wanted to move away and transition into in-house, or was that a decision you made as you went through those 2 years?
I have found on a number of different occasions in life that things work out correctly, kind of with or without your consent. There have just been instances where, something which seemed at the time to be devastating, like my training contract being taken away, actually turned out to be like the best thing in the world. I actually have some of my closest friends now were my fellow trainees at Mayor Brown, and I never would have met them if I had, been elsewhere.
Absolutely.
But when it came to the end of my training contract, I had to sort of make the decision that everyone qualifying has to make. Am I a firm lawyer or am I a practice area lawyer? I knew very much that I was a practice area lawyer, and I really wanted to qualify actually at the time into FinReg, which was my third seat. I was in the Financial Services Regulatory and Enforcement Group, and that straddled transactional advisory work and litigation. So like investigations of financial services, high court claims.
Yeah.
And I absolutely loved it. I thought it was incredible. The only difficulty is it was a small team. And they had, at the time, an NQ and a 1 PQE lawyer, and then a junior partner and a senior partner. There was really not headcount for another NQ.
Right.
And I really wanted to qualify into this team. HR just came to me at the end of my third seat and was like, "We're really sorry to say they are not recruiting for your cycle." And so I said, "Okay, gutted,
yeah,
but that's fine, right?" Like where you are told, like this is not the thing or the seat or the area that you can qualify into. You really actually do need to sit back and ask yourself, what do I want to do?
Yeah.
If somebody offers you an internal job in a seat that you might not actually love, but it's comfortable, right? You don't need to interview again. You don't have to put yourself on the market. You don't have to dust off your CV. Yeah. That's a comfortable move.
Yeah.
But you also risk waking up in 11 years and asking yourself, like, how did I become a banking finance lawyer? I didn't know that. This is not what I had anticipated.
Yeah.
Also, nothing against banking finance. I know some of my best friends are banking finance lawyers. But one of the junior partners on the FinReg team came over from a major bank. This was after my end of seat appraisal. Everything was fine. And I said, I want to do this for a living. How do I get there? She gave me some tough, but ultimately really good advice. It's difficult because FinReg teams across the city typically have very healthy trainee intakes. And frequently, if not almost always, they will have internal qualifiers that will go in. Moving in at NQ level is really tough in certain areas. And some of the transactional areas, it is easier.
Yeah.
But this is a pretty niche advisory seat. And some of the really prominent FinReg teams, some of which I now have great relationships with, they do a very sort of healthy trainee intakes, and they all had internal qualifiers. No one was hiring. And she said the thing that I would say is I would actually go to a major asset manager or bank. She said, depending on the area that you want to learn about, the regs of the ins and outs, and I said, I would ideally like funds reg. Now, funds reg is even more niche than just general FinReg. She said, then definitely a major bank. And I was thinking to myself, well, we've got the major players, right? Barclays in the UK is probably, I would think of as probably the biggest in terms of sort of complex investment bank, asset management kind of thing. I had sort of looked online, and Goldman came up. And at the time, it was the Regulatory Solutions team. They had a secondee. I had only found this out, I guess, once I had gotten the role, but they had a legal secondee come in from one of their panel law firms that had been helping them on legal questions for a while. And she had recently left and gone back to the firm. And they were saying, we would like somebody who's legally qualified to sort of come in and help us do horizon scanning and analysis, so that we can better understand, what is actually important coming on the horizon. How might this affect GSAM? So this was particularly Goldman Sachs Asset Management. I was like, I'm in, right? This is great. This is exactly what I wanted with Goldman Sachs. right? Like with one of the premier investment banks in the world. In this case, it was their buy side arm and all of their alternatives funds. So it included private credit, private equity, infrastructure, etc. At the time, I'd gotten a litigation offer for a pensions and trusts team. And I really had this fork in the road. One was in private practice and one was in-house. But I was like, I'm a practice area lawyer. Like, this is what I wanted. I'm just going to go for it. And who knows what's going to happen. If I'm going to make this choice, like, let's make it now. Let's do it. And I just sort of, I thought about like the private practice aspect and like, oh, could I move back into private practice and whatnot. I just thought like, there is no better opportunity than right now to go to like one of the most complex, hedge fund, private equity fund type asset managers and institutional asset managers at that, and learn on more complex funds. Goldman funds are immensely complex. The level of regulatory scrutiny that they need to be aware of at any given time is enormous. The structures of their funds are hugely complex. They're multi-domiciled. Some have aggregators and some don't. Some have blockers and some don't. And ultimately, it's a minefield of reg. And I was just like, I will get more of an opportunity to learn about the complex financial regulations associated with funds here than anywhere. When I joined in October, and promotions were announced in November. And one of the managing directors of the group that we were in was made up to partner. And there was an ensuing reorganization there, and it was reintegrated. My team was reintegrated with the change team, with the regulatory change team. And I was, told like, oh, like we're going to be doing end-to-end implementation. So like a bit of horizon scanning, but not really. We're going to be focused on taking a regulation and putting it into project mode and delivering it all the way out. And I thought to myself, I haven't trained and qualified as a lawyer to like do this. Like that's not what I trained to do. And there's nothing wrong with project management. It's just not what I'm good at, and it's not what I've dedicated like 6 years of my life to accomplishing. And then my current role, I just sort of decided, I think, as much as I love the institution, like the timing just didn't work. I just sort of said like, okay, it's time for me to like really get more legal. I found where I am now. I made the jump, just under a month ago. The choice to go in-house, it was not about going in-house. It was just about focusing on the practice area that I really wanted to stick with. And that just happened to be in-house. I think people that are looking to prospective trainees and lawyers, I think need to be a little less concerned with the private practice moniker or the in-house moniker, and just sort of realize that like, yes, in-house is a bit more commercial, still super interesting. Private practice is where you're going to get the really wide array of questions from so many clients, but ultimately like we're all practicing the law, we're all solicitors, and we're all like learning as we go. The law is continually evolving, and we're still, practicing law. So
I think what's so clear from your journey is like, I think the first point being, like you said, you've got to be so clear about what you want and then see what form that takes. If like you knew the area you wanted to go into and what kind of thing you wanted to practice, and then it was just, okay, where's the opportunity? And then once you get there, okay, is this what I want to do? And kind of recalibrating that every time. And I think that takes a lot of introspection and really knowing what it is that you want. But I think the other thing that I took from, which I guess goes back to your superpower, is of talking to people and building those relationships. Because that junior partner, they gave you some tough advice, but actually they told you the reality of what it is that you had to do if you wanted to be in that position. And I think that is the stage we want to get to, especially not just in our personal lives with your partner and your family, but also at work, so that people can tell you, okay, look, this is the reality at the moment, this is the landscape. If you want to do it, these are the pathways. And I think that only comes with building those relationships and ensuring that you're not just taking from them, but giving in return as well at every point. And from the point of moving from Goldman and back into your current role is a lot of people might be thinking, oh my God, like he's got a job, at Mayer Brown, and then now it's at Goldman, like these all such big names. Did you have any fear of thinking, oh, I want to stay for a bit longer and have this on my CV for a little bit longer before I leave, so that I've got this like thing at it for a particular moment of time? Or were you very sure that, well, no, it's not what I want to do, so let's just get on to the next one?
I think there is some risk of that after enough jumping,
Right.
but I do think, especially in law, and you see this sometimes on other people's LinkedIn's, like I will frequently see people who have been at like four law firms, one law
Yeah,
firm for a year, another law firm for another year, and then they went to a third firm for a year, and then they've
yeah,
been at a fourth law firm, but they've been there for like 5 years. And I think there's a real difference in the sector of law that is, we're kind of all doing the same thing. We're practicing the law, right? Like this isn't drastically different than, you know, this firm, like, I mean, any city firm is basically the same as another city firm in terms of the quality of training that you're going to
yeah.
get. I actually asked this. I asked this to a senior associate in my second seat. I was in insurance litigation, and I loved insurance. I was like the most out of the blue seat. I was given insurance litigation, and I was like, oh my god, this is going to be so boring. Who has
Yeah.
ever wanted to be in insurance litigation? And it actually turns out that the amount that you need to know about insurance is not a whole lot. You do need to know a lot about the law of the underlying claims. That was just the most incredible insight to get. It was the most interesting seat, probably by far. I think it's the only area that would have pulled me away from FinReg at all.
Wow.
But I asked my supervisor at the time, who was incredible. Now he's not at Mayor Brown anymore. The insurance group has kind of moved across the city. And I asked him, I said, what is the difference between the training at Mayor Brown versus Baker McKenzie or HSF or Latham and Watkins or Weil? And he said, almost nothing. Like, you guys are all going to be really competent lawyers. It's the difference of a high street firm or an international law firm, right? Like,
Yeah.
how multi-jurisdictional is it going to be? How many complex questions of like legal interpretation is going to have to go through? I remember one insurance litigation claim was a Swiss-based insurance policy with a London-seated arbitration, and the clause that needed interpretation was based on a Middle Eastern public pension fund and how it would have been defined in the local jurisdiction. So we had three different angles, three different
Yeah.
jurisdictions of law, all
Yeah.
vying for like the same thought time, with a three arbitral panel, and that kind of really opened my eyes to what it is that he was getting at. You're probably actually looking more for the culture of the law firm than for the content of the law firm. The content is actually going to be probably widely similar from that point of view. Like I'm not so worried about the jumping. I got the interview question where I currently am, which is like, you've been at Goldman like 8 months at the time. I think I left at the 10 and a half month marker. And they were
Yeah.
like, why are you looking to go? I mean, I gave them the actual answer, which is like, we have a reorg. They took the legal work that I had been kind of recruited to do for them away. And that was just sort of like the name of the game with a big bank. And that's
Yeah.
fine. Like, that's okay. And they were like, oh, that's totally understandable. Yeah, like, you've worked really hard to be a
Right.
lawyer, but if you're not being a lawyer anymore, then come be a lawyer for us.
Just in the final one, I guess if someone's listening to this and is in the position of like they've just qualified and they're looking for like
Mm.
in like you, they have a particular practice area they want to go into, but there's no space in the firm, for example, like with your experience, what advice would you give them in terms of where they should be looking or who they should be talking to for advice on that?
So the first thing that I would say is talk to a couple of recruiters.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not going to be a hard thing to do. By the time you're in
Yeah.
your second seat, recruiters will already be reaching out. They'll already be LinkedIn messaging you saying, hey, you free for a chat? They're going to come to you. And the reality is, you should definitely entertain those conversations. You should entertain them early. You should entertain them often, because there is no guarantee, right? Like, I don't think qualifying now is what it was 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
think the wage war and, increasing NQ salaries is a really positive thing, but it also means there are actually less NQ spots, right?
Yeah.
If 6 years ago it was 100K and it's 150 now, for every two, NQs, you've lost one, right? Like
Yeah.
if you would have taken three, now you're taking two. I think most of it is figuring out what the market is like. If
Mm-hmm.
you say I really want to, qualify into finance, they're going to say, "Oh, amazing. I have so many firms that are going to be recruiting into finance." Like asking the right questions is key. Are there practice areas that will be recruiting for this? What do the prospects really look like? Asking for really honest answers, because there are a lot of recruiters that will just say, of course there are. They
Mm.
are incentivized to say, of course there are, right? Like they
Yeah.
make their money at the end of the day by moving lawyers around. If that doesn't work, I would not be disheartened, because there are so many legal opportunities in-house that reflect the kinds of work that you might want to do. I just don't think it should be taboo to talk about qualifying in-house anymore. There is so much interesting work going on that lawyers can have huge input on and huge ramifications on. The reality is, while recruiters are a good source of knowledge, you have to find like one or two that you really trust that will actually have your best interests, which is really rare to find. But beyond that, it's actually very much about having an open mind as to where it is that you might want to go and maybe how it is that you want to angle your work. And you can pivot, right? Like your career is not, one trajectory. I do think that if somebody is determined to stay in private practice, then being slightly flexible on maybe the focus of a practice area or something like that is
Yeah.
very useful. Like if you want to do funds finance, but you know there's no funds finance group, but they do have real estate finance, they have project finance, they have
Mm.
syndicate loans or debt capital markets, something like you can get a lot of that relevant experience.
Yeah.
And I think increasingly we're seeing law firms that are sort of like really spreading it wide. And unless you're, obviously if you're a senior associate and you're really specialized, then probably that's going to be a bit different. But on the junior end of the spectrum, a transactional lawyer is a transactional lawyer. If you've been in
Yeah.
finance, like you can apply your skill to a mildly different area. You need to ask yourself maybe like a series of questions. Am I a practice area lawyer or a law firm lawyer? If I want to stay in the firm and I love the firm, that's great, no problem. If you're the practice area lawyer, you need to talk to recruiters. You need to understand what is out there, what the market looks like. Is it, going to heat up? Is it going to change? Are these particular positions, cyclical, not cyclical? What's the churn like, etc.? And then after that, I mean, you just sort of have to take it from there, and always happy to entertain a question, outside of this. No worries.
Amazing. We'll definitely put your just so you can get a couple more DMs rather than the red ones as well about
Yeah, no
your
problem.
journey. But on that note, Justin, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and giving us so much of your time on a late Thursday evening. I really, really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure.
And and I'm sure that it's going to be really, really useful for a lot of people, whether they are in that stage of like applying or are currently doing their training contract. I think it's really relieving to learn and hear from someone who has been through that journey. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no, it's a tough one, but I'm always happy to help.
And on that note, thank you so much for listening to this episode, and a massive shout out to Justin for coming on Commerce Meets Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please do let me know by emailing commercemeetslaw@gmail.com or with a DM on Instagram at Commerce Meets Law. And you can also reach out to us on our website, which will be linked down in the description. Finally, for extra summer content, do check out the Commerce Meets Law YouTube channel, where we also upload the video versions of all of these episodes, and our TikTok. For now, take care, goodbye, and I'll see you very soon on the next episode.